I hope this day finds everybody well. It's been a little while. We've started podcasting again. We've started recording some things. I'm excited about what we have available. I'm pretty sure everyone has had a couple of Dwayne recordings so far, and he's always a delight to listen to. Another person who is a delight to listen to is Mike Moreau. So, Mike, you're the owner of Concord Consulting. That's the company that put out traits, and it's always fun to talk with you. For me personally, I find that I always learn a lot. I always have these ideas and these concepts, and I think I've got a good idea of something. And you consistently challenge me just to tweak little areas of my thinking in when it comes to hiring, when it comes to problem solving in a business, when it comes to succession planning, like whatever it is. I find that you always give me a few little details and also a little analogies that really help me. So thank you for coming on. Welcome to this podcast. I'm excited to talk to you here.
Yeah, great. Well, no pressure on my end then for this conversation.
Yeah, competing with the Dwaynes of the world, right? So what I think we're going to do is I'm going to share a little bit about my experience. When I got a little bit of training in this, I came from a perspective, again, people have heard this on the podcast, my background psychology. I think I'm half decently smart. I think I've got a decent read on people. So I was thinking to myself, like, hey, I know what I'm doing with this hiring process. I just need to find the right person. And it was all person focused. The biggest maybe aha moment in training and finding the right people was when that switched from a person focus to a role focus. What is needed in this role? Now, we've talked about this a lot on this podcast, but what I'm hoping to do is in the training that I got from you, the biggest aha moment in that training was something called performance orientation. And this is a simple concept, but it kind of puts together so many pieces for me and really gave me the framework, the foundation from which I can start to understand why aren't people certain good fits in my organization or in other people's organizations, and why are some people fantastic fits. So maybe I'll start with this question. Just give a brief understanding of what performance orientation is. What is the concept? Where does it come from? How is it helpful?
Yeah. Okay. Well, performance orientations is really sort of put together around two traits: assertiveness and detail orientation. And the more that we understand about these two characteristics and this idea of performance orientations, then the better we actually quickly get at being able to build and form teams. Because we see what are the components that we need, and who are the people there that actually fit those. So if you think about this idea of performance orientation, we think about high assertiveness, and I sort of explain it this way in terms of this idea of foot on the gas or foot off the gas. So the lower somebody's assertiveness, the more that they're going to sort of hesitate on things. They're going to just be a little bit more risk averse. Just be careful about moving forward into new areas and trying new things. Whereas the more that you have somebody that likes taking risk, obviously the harder they stomp down on the gas pedal and push things, which is what you get when you put higher assertiveness together. And then when you think about detail orientation, the other trait, high detail orientation is foot on the brake. And I'm going to be more cautious about this, and let's just slow down a little bit more. And then lower detail orientation is foot off the brake. And so if you sort of think about those two things working together in harmony with each other around exploring new things and taking on new initiatives, that's a great way of looking at it. The lower somebody's assertiveness and the higher their detail orientation, the more they're hesitant about things and keeping their foot on the brake around new initiatives that are coming in. But then as soon as you start kind of relieving those and moving those around, now we start to get different kinds of people in the world that say, I don't mind tapping on the accelerator every once in a while, but I'm going to, keep my foot kind of close to the brake too. And I'm going to hit that and just, be careful about the things that we do before we go flying down this road. And then, of course, the entrepreneurs that are high assertiveness and low detail orientation that just say, let's see how fast we can get things moving. So
what break?
Sorry, go ahead.
What break, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So so it's that sort of idea, taking those two traits and And then we name them. We sort of the degrees of orientation that we have. So somebody that's the big foot on the gas, and foot off the brake. Those are the initiators in the world. Those are people that extremely results focused in terms of, is this producing the result that I need it to? No, we're going to change everything. We're going to try something completely different. Very solution oriented type of individuals. Not very task oriented. They don't tend to sort of do operational work all that well. The opposite of that is the foot off the gas and foot on the brake, which we would call implementers. And those would be people that would be far more interested, far more motivated by work that has lots of security to it, lots of checks and balances, lots of activities that they can do, that they make sure that they know, when I do this, I have this kind of an outcome at the end. There's no risk involved. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. It's follow the things that need to be done. So, two different jobs. You think about the entrepreneur, which would be the initiator, and then you think about the engineer, AX over DY type of work, which would be the implementer. And then sort of the third category in there are facilitators. And so what happens when you put big entrepreneurs with big technical people, you put those two groups in the room, it's almost like they're talking different languages. And so then there's those individuals that are the facilitators. So that's a narrow combination of those characteristics that come into play, that say, well, sometimes I like to assert myself, but sometimes maybe not so much, and it depends on the situation. Or sometimes I like to measure things, but sometimes not so much. And so they actually work really well because they seem to be able to connect with the implementers, connect with the initiators, and help to bring projects to life. Ultimately, take that big idea, facilitate how it comes together, and then pass that on to be integrated or implemented on a regular basis, in a consistent basis, to the implementers.
Yeah, it's almost as though those facilitators can help communicate between both sides. They can hear each person's perspective and go, oh, hey, like, this is helpful in here. These are the advantages to you. They really are those facilitators, as the word implies. But I mean, obviously, 3 roles is overly simplistic for an organization, and I get that. But maybe talk about, because you've got a beautiful analogy that you use. It's something that I think about a lot. It helps put things in perspective for me. So explain the ship analogy and where people are on that ship, and how that brings perspective to the roles that we need in our organizations.
Yeah, so maybe to take a half step back and just sort of be careful that we're not oversimplifying by saying one of 3 categories, because again, then we have degrees of all of that. And again, because we're working on scales, we have those degrees that start to show up. So you can have really strong initiators, which are very, very wide on our scale. Then you have what we would call initiators. Then we would have facilitator initiators, facilitator implementers, and very strong technical implementers. So it's sort of like there are some different categories that start to come in, but again, all scale based in being able to see that. So trying not to box people into different areas, but then to try and explain this to people so that they get the concept. I think that ship idea is just a really good one. So the way that sort of plays out is you can sort of think about a giant mast in a boat. And when one person that could be very quickly described as a strong initiator would be Steve Jobs. So it's almost like Steve Jobs, the mast on his boat going up from Apple was hundreds of feet in the air. And he would look out and he would see things like he was almost past land. He could see over the horizon. Because of that height, he had just an unbelievable ability to be able to see everything that's going on. And you can imagine, being that high, do you know what's going on in the boat? Not really. And how interested are you in climbing down the pole to get down into the boat and figure out what's going on? Not really all that excited about that. So it's those strong initiators have got such a great orientation of being up really high and being able to see those types of things. Special people like Steve. So and then when you move to from strong initiator to initiator, it's kind of like now we've moved down the mast a little bit, and those people can listen to what Steve was talking about, but can also see down a little bit more clearly can start to see the outline of the boat. They can't see over the horizon, but they've got a bit of an idea of the boat. And those are the people that help to be able to take those ideas and flesh some of those concepts out, come up with some of the clearer ideas. Then you have the facilitator initiators, which would be, now we're kind of getting down around the boat, and we can see a few of them running around and shouting orders and doing the different things that need to be done and preparing the boat for the journey that it's about to take. Every once in a while, one of them ducks below deck, but we see them pop right back out again. And engaging with, and then shouting up to the initiators, hey, we're running into problems over here. Good, okay, well, we'll figure out how to direct things and adjust. Then you have your, what I would call your facilitator implementers. And those would be people that probably would be a little bit below deck. These would be kind of the supervisors of the organization. And they've got important jobs to do. They've got to make sure that within each one of the departments throughout that ship, everything's being executed and done the way that we need to be able to be doing those things, and sort of follow the checklists and pieces that need to happen at that level. And you have your implementers, which would be, maybe some of your mechanics that would be doing some of the work and twisting wrenches. And when Steve, when they hear something that Steve Jobs is talking about from way up high, they're not interested at all. They don't even hear it. They've got layers of floors that separate them from all of that noise. But eventually that'll make it down to them, because they're going to need to build a bigger engine. They're going to need to do something different. And then you have your specialists that are probably doing the engineering work in that, in that company, and doing the really heavy duty things, the strong implementers. So it's sort of, so that's a little bit of the analogy.
There are so many things that jump out to me about this analogy every time you talk about it. One thing that jumps out to me is how valuable it is to have all of these different roles. If everyone was top of the mass type people, like if entrepreneurs just hired people like ourselves, what we would discover is we're all arguing about kind of the best way to get where we want to go, and none of us is actually doing it. Maybe we're doing it a little bit, but we're so far in the clouds sometimes that it's not helping the boat run. We need a lot of people on and inside the boat. There's a good reason for that.
To interrupt, but here's what I see over the horizon. Great. Well, here's what I see over the horizon. Here's my idea is better than yours is. Why don't we go my way? And meanwhile, who's paying attention to the boat and whether it can do something or not? Who cares? Here's what I see over the horizon.
Yeah, which again, if you had the opposite end of the continuum, if you had everyone that is simply debating on what the exact amount of torque is for each bolt, if that's the debate that's being had, then you don't go anywhere. You're never actually going. You just run into whatever is in front of you. Correct?
The engine will always do the same thing that the engine's always done, because we always torque it to this.
Yeah. So again, coming back to the opposite end of the continuum, and we'll go into the middle here in a bit, but going back to those people who are at the top of the mast, it's so incredibly important for them to say, oh, this isn't happening, or this has changed. Well, I can see this larger picture, so I'm gonna tweak some things here. I'm gonna ask you to change some things here, change some things there. And if they were speaking directly to the people who are torquing those bolts, it's annoying. Because the torquers go, you just asked me to do this. Why are you changing it now? Why are you changing it now? And getting really frustrated. Maybe speak to that a little bit. Again, there's role for the facilitator or middle people in the organization to help communicate.
Yeah, well, it's almost a buffer, or again, a bridge to being able to do that, because oftentimes, we all have to start somewhere in our career, and oftentimes we start in the engine room. You got to learn all of the things about how the engine works, and how how much to torque something, and how often oil changes need to happen. All of it, you got to learn that. But then there are some people that say, I forever want to do this. I love being the expert here. Leave me here. And there are some people that say, I'm just not interested in that. And some people around the room say, you know what, that's the person that we always go to solve our problems. And that person eventually sort of rises up and supervises that kind of work. And they say, I don't really want to go any higher than this, because I don't want that additional responsibility. Things get a little bit too too ambiguous when I get up on deck, because now I got to listen to those people that are trying to get me to do things, and really I feel safer here under the decks and supervising the work of other people. But because they've actually done that work, they develop all of this knowledge and experience and all of those types of things, so they can go in and take the wrench away from the implementer and help with that, and then pull back out again. They don't need to stay on the wrench all day. So you need those facilitators that are there, because when the facilitator initiator comes in from the top of the deck and says, we need more power, the facilitator implementer says, well, we're already limited at where we are. And now those two create this beautiful tension that starts to happen inside of an organization where the manager says, yeah, but Steve says we got to do this, and we got to get moving. So what are some things that we can do? Now that person has worked themselves oftentimes through a little bit of that organization, had to start in the engine room to a certain degree, probably spent a lot less time there, but hopefully has got a bit of an understanding about how things work, to be able to start thinking about some different solutions or ideas that this person can then go and bring those less extreme fixes to the implementers that ultimately can start tweaking some of the dials and making things work properly, so that again the ship gets to where it needs to be.
Yeah. Okay. So again, this is a great analogy for understanding these broad concepts. Let's make it more, I guess, practical for the business owner, the HR director, or whoever is working with other people in the organization. How does somebody identify these people? You talked about foot on the gas versus foot on the brake, or off the gas and off the brake, but how do we find these? I mean, the obvious answer is the traits tool and psychometric assessments and that kind of stuff. But maybe make it a lot more practical for people. How does somebody start to see this, rather than putting a bunch of massed dwellers all over the ship, or maybe bulwark dwellers all over the ship, instead finding the right pieces for the right role?
Yeah. So almost maybe to explain that a little bit, just to sort of think about those various levels and almost the mismatch of people to be able to see that, because I think you get people that are halfway up the mast, and if you actually stood back and said, so what is the work that this director is doing? That's kind of director level work, a little bit up the mast, off of the top of the ship. But what is the work that they're doing? Isn't that interesting? They're going right down into the bowels of the ship again, and they're supervising some of their people. So do things the way that I did when I was down here, and there's a certain checklist that I expect you to do, and don't challenge me too hard, and just execute the stuff. And that person's going to be sort of watching over the way that those people do work, even at the director level. So what is it that they're doing? They're actually supervising the people that are below them, as opposed to building better performance, building increasing performance out of the people that are there, and trusting those individuals to be able to do that work. So are you supervising them every day, or are you actually empowering those people, which you should be doing at that director level, because you got to be more hands off. You've got to be looking at where we're going, not overseeing the work of others. So that'd be one area that I think you'd if you were studying the way that people are showing up in your business, that'd be a way to sort of look at that, a filter to be able to use. And then I had somebody else just recently who was talking about how, one of the best risks that they ever took, they were at a kind of an engine room level, but their traits were more of the probably director level inside of the business. And so they were always going and creating all sorts of problems in the engine room. Hey, we could be doing this. Hey, we could try that. And yeah, I didn't tighten things up as much this time. And guess what happened? And doing those kinds of things. And so, she said that the manager said, you've got to do these things and you got to do them well, but we're also going to second you up onto the ship's deck, and you're going to get some different experiences. And so for this person, it was, and I'm trying to remember where it came from, but it was a women's leadership group, women in business leadership group. And it was just kind of like, well, I'd never done that before, but but yeah, I can kind of see over the bigger picture, and that's the level at which I operate. And so I get to go and take a lead over here. Now, from early morning until early afternoon, I have to be in the engine room, but I get so excited about this thing this new concept that I get to go and bring and bring to the rest of the ship, and teach them about these wonderful things that women in business can do, and what we can go and accomplish, how we're going to get together, all of those different things. That's the work that she loved to do. So who's doing that in your business? Who's supposed to be in the engine room but keeps dreaming and wanting to get halfway up the mast, and is telling you all of the things that they see further down into the horizon?
So, I mean, keeping our eyes open constantly in our organization for who are those people who are maybe a little lower on the ship than suits them. They could be in a position that suit them far better, which then suits the ship's needs far more. What about opposite? Because again, the analogy or the case study that you've shown me a number of times is how do we look at people in directors' roles, presidents' roles, whatever it is, and notice, hey, you know what? That where I see their foot on both pedals is giving me insight as to some of the problems that we're going to see in the future. Maybe talk about that a little bit, and I'm sure that you're going to bring in coaching here, and how it cannot fix who we are, but maybe speak about that as well.
Yeah, well, again, I think it's sort of this idea of levels of work inside of the organization, and there are different levels of work that clearly exist. If you're looking at an organizational structure, there's a reason why they're built that way. It sort of represents the level of work that happens, and again, because most organizations don't have that framework that they can lay over all of the jobs from a traits standpoint, those enduring character, like how do I can say from a competency standpoint, I need to be strategic. But if I'm not naturally strategic, then it's kind of the last thing that I do in my day, and it only gets 5 minutes of time. And so that's not a good framework to use. So I think a behavioral based assessment to be able to lay over that framework of what do we really need that person to do, and then who are the individuals that are going into that. But I think it shows itself over and over and over again. And Peter Principle is a beautiful example of people rise to the level of incompetence within an organizational structure, and as awful as that sounds, it is the reality that I was a 9 out of 10 here, an 8 out of 10 here, still above average at a 7 out of 10, and then I became the 5.5 out of 10, and forever I just kind of struggled inside of that job, and it just never really felt like it fit me. And so I think we see that in organizations, and so what does the world do? Well, we try and take that 5.5 and provide them with coaching, as you say, or provide them with training, those kinds of things. But again, there's a reason why there are these different levels of work that exist, and why organizational structures are organized the way that they are, because people have got filters, levels within them that they grow to. And then they probably don't grow anywhere above that. And again, back to that idea of there are some people that grow to the level of engine room operator, and they're happy doing that kind of work. And we need people to do that kind of work. And thank goodness they're there doing all of the things that they do inside of those roles. And there are other people that say, no, I want to be a supervisor, but I don't want to be anything other than a supervisor. I tried manager once and I didn't like that. Like, why can't I change to do that? No amount of coaching is going to make me feel comfortable taking on that kind of a position. And so, again, sort of this idea of if we could just bring people to the level of where they are exceptional, and then figure out how to develop them there, organizations would run in an entirely different way at an entirely different level of performance.
Yeah, give me an example, Mike, of somebody who might have been at a director level or VP level that you can think of that just you noticed, hey, this is not going to be a fit, and then you saw it play out over time. I know that you've shared a few examples with me before.
Yeah. Well, I mean, back to case studies that we have, or back to somebody coming in.
Talk to the guy about the guy and the extra desks you found in his office every time.
Yeah. Well, moving from director of, I think he was a director of operations, that was the position that he held, and just somebody that was taking on that position, but had an orientation to just being extremely hands-on. And so I remember coming into the first meeting with him, and he cleared his desk in this big new shiny object or office aside, and he cleared all the paperwork aside, and I had enough room to kind of put my book down, and that was about it. And he said, "Tell me about this traits thing." And he said, "Do you have a manual?" And I said, "Well, no, I don't have. Well, sorry, I do have a manual, but it's a big thick one, and we give it to you when you sign up for training. All you have to do is sign up for training and buy the program, and we'll give you this big, beautiful manual." He said, "Well, I'd like to see that before I go through any training and before I try your product." I thought, well, that's a really weird thing to do. I certainly wouldn't go and buy a car and look at the manual first, or a computer and look at the manual first. I'd probably do that afterwards. But I said no. The owner of that business eventually said, "We're doing this," and so he had to sort of agree with that. But he was a guy that just needed to director level, but needed to learn everything before he took a step. And so, we might say, well, yeah, that kind of makes sense. We need to learn a little bit about the next step that we're going to take in order to feel confident in taking it. But unfortunately, at that level inside of the organization, there was so much that was going on, and he had to learn about everything. And so we're going to buy a new machine. I got to go learn about that. Can I have the manual, please? I got to go to Chicago and learn all about this new machine. Yeah, but you're not going to be running the machine. Yeah, I know, but I got to go and, okay, well, now we're putting an ERP together. Okay, well, I got to go learn about the ERP, and I got to get the manual out, and so to your point, this started off with him clearing out a little bit of paperwork on his desk so that I could put my book down, to him having Costco tables littered through his office of all of the manuals and all sorts of different things that were loaded upon that he was just constantly trying to learn and trying to understand. Probably exceptional at some level inside of the organization, under the bowels of the ship, making sure that stuff was getting done. But when they put him high, middle of the way up the mast, he really couldn't be doing that. And yet there he was every day, not at the middle of the mast. He was down in the weeds and trying to learn everything and understand everything and control everything. And it's a real classic example that I'm sure a few of our listeners have run into through the years with different managers that they've had.
Yeah. Something that comes to my mind is conversations I have with people. So I've got a conversation with my admin assistant probably 3 or 4 times a week where there's some problem. And I'm a lower mass guy. That's kind of where my role is. There are people way higher as far as their best fit on the mast, higher than me. But I tend to be able to manage small groups of people fairly well. Nothing big. I'll never have $1 billion business because it would fall apart before it grows. But I've spoken with my admin assistant consistently, and she will get caught up in details. And I'm like, hey, listen, I'm hearing that, but we need to make this decision. Once we make this decision, so just give me a little bit of information. Once we make this decision, then we can figure out a lot of those details. So I've got this experience of spending time with somebody who is more in the bowels of the ship, and they think they need more details, and they will need more details, like you talked about. Eventually, you want to read the manual. Mm-hmm. That's a fact. You eventually want to read the manual. But if you get somebody at the top of the mast to try to read manuals, they end up flipping through the table of contents saying, I've got a pretty good idea, and try to implement it. Whereas you've got the people at the bottom, they're trying to read the manual before they get anything done, right? So with my admin assistant, often I'm having the conversations of, hey, trust me, we're going to get there. The details will kind of figure itself out, but let's just make some of these decisions, and that will help us. On the other hand, there's an entrepreneur that I have an incredible amount of respect for. This man has become one of my mentors in business, and he does run a very, very large business that he started from nothing. And I find in conversations with him, I'm the admin assistant. We'll have a conversation. I'll be like, but I'm having this problem. And he's like, Mark, you're focusing on details. You're getting stuck in the weeds, because he's just so much more bigger picture thinker. And he's constantly reminding me, Mark, if you're going to run a business, you can't get stuck in the weeds like this. He's the kind of person that I see 30 problems ahead, and he goes, we'll figure those out as we come. Let's just do what we need to do first, and then we'll discover some of those problems. Whereas again, people foot on the brake, off the accelerator, tend to really get stuck in the details. Would you agree, disagree? Where would you tweak what I've just said?
Yeah, well, I think that happens for all of us, frankly. I mean, there's places that you and I get stuck in the details and all of the, like, there's an obstacle that we just run up against, and it happens for all of us, except for maybe Elon would be the only one that seems to be able to smash through most of those. But it happens for all of us because we all have our place on the boat, place on the mast. And it's not until we actually come across and see those people that can actually, that are at a higher level inside of that mast. And I've got those people in my life that do exactly the same thing, that just sort of see over the horizon a little bit more, while I'm seeing all of the icebergs and the land masses that exist. They see over the horizon more. So I think we all have that. And one other sort of quick thing that is fairly popular in the book Traction, the EOS operating system. And they often talk about the idea of visionary and integrator. And I think it's almost sort of to a certain degree limited, because I think that visionary integrator thing happens not just at the top level, but I think a good business has that happen all the way down as you look through the organization. So the visionary for you, and you're that person's integrator. And then you will be the visionary for the next person, who will be your integrator. But they will be the visionary for, and we're working our way further down the mast, and somebody's on deck, integrating for the director. And they've got people that now they become a visionary for those people that are below deck. And so again, when you build a great company, you do that intentionally. I think that cascading flow of that visionary integrator happens all the way down through the business. And it's like one level complements another. It's when we mess that up that now all of a sudden my manager is micromanaging me, or my manager is just not giving me nearly enough direction. Might be the example of your assistant who says, I just don't get enough direction from Mark. And so I've got to go back to him 3 times to ask him that same question again, or a variation of it. And it's because there's probably just a little bit more of that gap that starts to appear in the levels that are there.
Well, let's go back for a second. We talked about this individual who'd been stuck in kind of a director's role, and everything was getting stuck there. In a situation like that, you talked about coaching, like more coaching is not necessarily going to be helpful, but what should an organization do with a person like that? What are some options? What is a process to go through?
Yeah, well, I always find personally it's different depending on the client's experience with us. So if we help identify that by using traits and having some discussions, and that's identified, and then there's a little bit of a proof of a couple of months of that. Oftentimes that person has been around in the business for a reasonable period of time. So the client has to come to a place where, okay, we've got to make a different decision about where we put this person inside of our business. But oftentimes they start to learn and understand that more quickly as time goes on, and get better again at defining what we need inside of that position, and finding the kinds of individuals that are applying to those types of roles, and so have more success ultimately as time goes on. So, none of this is easy. Some of it just comes down to plain old priorities. We need that person in that position, even though they're creating all these expense reports with all of the Costco tables that they keep buying us and stacking up all around the room. They've got such a body of knowledge that we need to keep within the business, that we can't make that decision right now, and we're going to deal with that. But ultimately there comes a time where that's going to happen, and where that, sort of that crack then becomes that chasm of that individual, that there's just too much getting stuck on that person's desk. I like kind of using this, a 0 to 10 scale. 0 being terrible fit, never should have hired that person. Hopefully none of us have ever had a 0 before. But 10 being the opposite side of that, hiring the Wayne Gretzky of a position. And so I'm just, what do I think most business owners should be trying to do? We should be trying to get people that we could sort of take a look at our org chart and say 7, 8, or 9 out of 10, 7, 8, or 9 out of 10, just over and over again as we're looking through. And I know that's not the reality. I know that there's a reality of a few 6s and a few 5s and maybe a few 4s and maybe a 3 or 2 that show up in there as well. And probably we deal with the 3s pretty quickly, but we've got a lot of 5s and 6s that, the priority may not be to take care of that individual right now, but we do have to be working at trying to get some of those people, those individuals released. And when the time comes, we'll do that. But let's make sure that we're trying to get that 7, 8, 9 out of 10 into that position. And I know that's a simple way of looking at all of this, but I think that whole idea of thinking about it, overall performance in the role by just putting a number to it. And then, is that something that I can change through education, experience, or skills, coaching, those types of things? Or have we already tried a bunch of those things and that person is, still at that level, and the old Peter principle is maybe taking place in that sort of an area? There's the time to try and figure out a strategy about what to do with that person and where to move them inside of the business.
And the size of the business really makes a big difference here too, right? In a really large business, 20,000 people, you can find, even if the person's a 4 out of 10, you can find that 8 somewhere in the organization. Whereas in an organization like myself, where you've got like 3 employees, you're limited in options. Now, if they're not a fit where we believe they could have been, then it's really like, hey, find something that is a better fit outside of this organization. Correct? Again, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I think small companies need to have all pistons firing, and so we've got to make sure that we've done a really good job of doing that, and the whole team with small teams feels the gap that exists. It's put a team on the ice, and whenever it goes to the left side defenseman who can't pivot backwards, we notice that every day, and we're getting scored on every day because the team's finding out about it, the other team's finding out about it, and that's not helping us. So we need to make a change on that pretty quickly and find somebody else. So oftentimes it's as those companies grow and maybe the owners don't have as much of a touch point on how is that person really doing inside of that role, and everything kind of gets delayed in terms of where and when you hear about it, because there's just so much that's going on. And again, the initiators are not highly interested in going down into all the different departments and just watching somebody do their job every day to see, okay, there's 7, 8, or 9 out of 10. But you need to have people inside of the business that you've built up to be able to take on those responsibilities and do that kind of work.
We've been focusing a lot on kind of the closer to the top side of the ship rather than the bottom side of the ship. But maybe let's finish off with this. What would you be looking for? What would you encourage a business owner, HR person, whatever is director to pay attention to when there's somebody who might seem disruptive near the bottom of the ship in the bowels somewhere, and actually they could be an 7 or 8 or 9 higher up in the ship? What should people be paying attention to?
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes that can be one of the greatest tragedies, is that you do have somebody that again is kicking all the walls in and not tightening all the bolts as much as they should be down in the engine room. And so if I'm not aware of that as a supervisor, then I fire you because you're just not doing the job. Where if we can grab onto that and refine some of those characteristics and make sure that they're doing a reasonable job there, but then give them some stretch opportunities to be able to go and do some other things, like the woman that I described that went and started up a women's network to go and launch across the company. Then I think that's what you need to do. So it's looking at, again, these are all the real performance related things, and diving into that to actually study what is it that's going on here, and am I when I sit back and watch this person in meetings and what they talk about and what they deem to be important, is that the the director that's going into the engine room every day, or is it the person that is in the engine room that is saying, we could make this engine so much more powerful if we could only do these things, and think of where it could take us, think of how quickly we could get there. So what's really going on in this situation, and rather than trying to again change the person to just focus on doing your job of twisting the wrench to the right torque. It's about sort of standing back and going, okay, there's actually somebody that's got some really neat potential here, and an opportunity to go and do something else. And you can't give them this job right now, but there is probably a path or a pattern or a way that we can bring people up in the business.
Yeah, it's almost the analogy, sticking with the analogy that we've used throughout this process is maybe that person in the bowels of the ship, they stop using their wrench and they keep trying to look out the holes of the ship. They're trying to always find out what's over the horizon, maybe, and going like, oh, maybe there's a better position for you where you do naturally see more from a larger standpoint, or from a top standpoint.
No, that's exactly right. You're flashing a quick story in my mind from a company here in Edmonton called OEM Remanufacturing, and we did some work with them for a little bit of time, and then I had Catherine come to me one day and say, Mike, we want to develop this new leadership development program. And we're going to bring people in. They had a process improvement group that they were bringing some of them into, and then this management development program. And so, what we did there is she said, we need future managers. We are growing, and we need future managers. We know that we need to develop them. So we want to actually go into some of the universities, and we want to go in with the traits tool, and we help them to build a model of what a future manager and a future leader would look like. And then they went into universities, they went into hiring, career fairs, those types of things. They got a whole bunch of people to go through the survey. And then they were able to actually pick out who are those individuals that have got the characteristics to do this kind of a level of job. And then they brought them into and sold them on this management development program. And they said, you are going to spend 6 months in each of these 4 different departments. And we're going to teach you all sorts of things, and you're going to get projects that you're probably not going to like. They don't have the traits that would be built for doing this kind, but you have to learn this. And so over 2 years, they would go to 4 different departments in OEM, and then they would be assigned to this management position inside of the organization. And they were a company that just was explosive in terms of the work that they did and that they took on, and that program just worked exceptionally well for them. But it's a great way of sort of identifying potential, identifying level of work where that fits into coming up with a development program to work their way up to that place. And again, all these years later, I still talk about it. And Catherine's working somewhere else now, but we've had a couple of chats about that whole experience, because it was such a great thing to do.
It's interesting because it wasn't just a research project, which I'm sure they got an amazing amount of data from it to help themselves and other organizations, probably used it for themselves. But it's also like just finding that great fit for every one of these potential all-stars in their organization. Finding that perfect fit for people is just brilliant. I've heard a few people contemplating that or thinking it through in some ways, and I think it's absolutely amazing when organizations do have that foresight to plan and make sure that they're taking care of their organization and their people in a completely different way.
It's being intentional, Mark. That's what it is. It's being intentional about the way that we build our business and the people. Right now, it's just like, I take a look at a resume, I hire the person. For some reason, they didn't work out. They never did this or did too much of that. And so off they go. But we never really did anything to actually measure them to see why they were successful or why they were not successful. But if we actually had a tool to be able to measure them so that we could understand that, we'd probably learn something from that. And we'd say, we're going to stop hiring people that have got these types of characteristics that are just wired this way to I stopped hiring the person at the CNC machine that just had to run always be in movement. And although they were very calm when I interviewed them, as soon as I put them in the job there, they were moving around all over the place, but I just need them to stand here at the machine. And you can't train somebody who isn't wired that way to do that. And so, just being more intentional about, okay, let's see why people are performing in their jobs or not performing in their jobs. Let's build a model to say this is what success looks like. And if we hire to that more consistently, inevitably the ship's going to end up in a better place at the end of the day, faster, better, bigger, all of those types of things, than if we're just sort of, again, unintentionally going, well, let's just try the next one. Let's just try the next one. We'll see what we have in 6 months.
Yeah, which, I mean, it can work, but it's so inefficient, right? Like, why take 10, 20, 30 times the amount of time to do it when you get it right really quickly?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's a perfect way to finish this off here, Mike. Unless you have anything else to say, is there anything else that comes to mind to finish this off?
No, I think that's good. I agree with you. Yeah. Good chat today. Always enjoy doing this back and forth with you. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate the time here.
Yeah, pleasure.